Good morning, Nair ma'am.
Manjushri, nice to see you, Manjushri. Good morning.
Very good
Your
morning.
session is going to follow. I should not be eating into your session, your
No,
timing.
no.
But then it seems like I have never left Nagpur.
Yeah.
Seeing you all even on screen, like when couples phone came in, I was so happy that I'll be able to see you all.
Yeah.
And thank you,
After such a
Kapil,
long
for
time.
bringing
Yeah.
me in. Yeah.
It's a
Hello,
pleasure, ma'am.
Dabir madam, Kapil sir, Dabir madam.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Whenever we the English fraternity meets, na ma'am,
Yeah.
together we have to mention you. We always remember you.
Yes.
Always.
Thank you so
There
much.
has to be some or the other mention of Madam Sandhya Nair. It has to be there.
Our
Thank you so
valuation
much.
days
Thank
also.
That is my generation, because all these children are my only.
Yeah,
Urmila
ma'am.
is my
Yeah, the
younger
motherly
sister.
figure that we had. Yeah.
You, other than Urmila, with Urmila, we have got, even though she was very young, she was always with the oldies. So we have got so many other memories to share. So I consider her as my, hello.
Now we are live on YouTube. Now we are live.
Okay.
Kapil, yeah.
Yeah. Good morning, one and all. As after the success of online classes for the MA first semester, for the course which is newly prescribed by Nagpur University, and after getting a favorable feedback from about 200 students of 8 different colleges, we have decided to go ahead with the online classes for semester 2 as well. So on behalf of the 4 collaborating colleges, Rajkumar Keval Ramani Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Jaripatka Nagpur, Mahila Mahavidyalaya Nandanvan Nagpur, J.M. Patel Arts, Commerce and Science College Bhandara, and Vasantrao Naik Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences Nagpur. I welcome you all to this inaugural session of the second of the online classes for second semester, and I'm happy to invite Madam Sandhya Nair, who was a principal of Dharampet Arts and Commerce, R.S. Munle Dharampet Arts and Commerce College, Nagpur. Ma'am retired in 2019, but as I have just mentioned that whenever the people of English fraternity, whenever they come together, there has to be mention of Madam. She was really a motherly figure for the people of my generation, for we youngsters, Nihal, Akhil, and Janeshwar Naik. They are always talking about ma'am, we really miss you. So found a way out to get connected to you again, and with rich experience of 30 years of teaching, around 10 research scholars being awarded PhD under her. Madam is a British Council teacher trainer. She is teacher trainer for Kerala government's satellite teacher training program, and she had been a member of syllabus designing committee of PG classes for Rashtrasant Tukaroji Maharaj Nagpur University. In fact, it was in that committee that for the first time I had worked with ma'am way back in around 2012 or 10. So on behalf of the organizers, I welcome Madam Sandhya Nair and ask her and request her for the inaugural address, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Kapil. Dr. Singhel, all these are my children. I only address Dr. Urmila Dabir as my younger sister, even though she belongs to the younger generation. She has been with me because she joined the teaching fraternity very early in her age. That's why she has been with us. So a big hug to all of you. Is it to me? Is that to me?
No, ma'am. No.
Okay. Sorry. If I go fast, do tell me, because I know that my time is limited. So my dear fraternity, English teaching fraternity, I'm so proud of all of you. And, and I'm so proud that, you have gone online, and Dr. Dabir was just telling me that, how all of you have contributed so well. The online teaching is going on very well. I also see snippets of it in the WhatsApp, in those groups also. So, I'm so glad to be back. When I got Dr. Singil's, phone call on that day, followed by Dr. Panika and also Dr. Umla Nabir at the background, I'm so glad to be back into teaching, because teaching is my lifeline. I've been in touch with, I've been teaching the Madras Christian College in between, and every now and then some here and there, some talks. Otherwise, back with my own Nagpur University and the PG teaching, as though I've left the family, now I'm back in the fold. So I'm addressing the students, even though they are faceless. This is something very strange for me to address, to teach without faces in front of me, because I'm a very traditional form of teacher, whether I like to get the responses from the faces so that I can know whether I'm really making any sense or not, so I can modulate my teaching. This is no teaching, but just an inaugural address. So I would like to share some of the things that me as a student, because even now I consider as a student of literature, every time I read something, even if it is a 10th time I might be reading it, it is a new text is born. I'm very much with the postmodern concept, work is a work, and every time you read, a new text is born. That is what I want you young students, want to encourage in all you young students. Whenever you read something, don't just go by what we teachers or your resource persons are telling you. You should be able to gather that is just for you. That is, I'm so sorry. What I benefited, I think even my students and we benefited from our way of understanding English literature. It was actually when we launched into this thing, we had all of inhibitions. It is a vast, huge, vast area. And where do we begin? Where do we end? And, we do have our inhibitions, but then how to get over it? And it is something we have to understand for sure, that we will never be able to master English literature on our own. We will be having our mastery in certain areas, but then go deep and contribute whatever you can to it, and have your own mind open, where you can read into new ways of aestheticism, pour in more aestheticism, more ways of how I did that, as a student, in my PG student itself, I had this tradition of English literature in my mind. That is what all of you should have. Whenever we mention an author, you should have in our mind that the great tradition and where that person stands. The Nagpur University has beautifully designed a syllabus in such a way that all your compulsory papers for every semester, first paper as well as the second paper, which are compulsory, that is taking care of that. I saw the background topics. It is actually starting with the Pierce, Plowman, Langland, that is, Middle English. But if you have that, I will just mention the things to you, which all the teachers might be knowing, but then for you students to have that in mind, so that whenever you study something, you are now entering the second phase, the neoclassical age. Your second semester, you are starting with the neoclassical age. So what we have left behind, that should always be in your mind. That is, in the background, you started with Pierce, Plowman, and then Chaucer, the immaculate fence sitter. He was the person who actually saw English language, or what we call as the London English, getting standardized. From Middle English, it was Chaucer's contribution, because he operated from the London area, and it was from that time onwards, from the Chaucerian times to the present day, it is the London English, which is now, in spite of all the English of all the variants now, it is that English which is being now still considered as the standard British English. So Chaucer, and then the transition towards the Renaissance English. The Renaissance English, we know, with the Sidney and Spencer, and then the university wits, and then we do have the alchemist, Shakespeare, and then we do have the Elizabethan Jacobean drama, and then the Caroline period, and then we come to the Ben Jonson's contribution, and then we come to the neoclassical period. You have actually covered till neoclassical period till now. What you are going to start with, the first lecture, which is going to be taken by the erudite Dr. Sardesh Pandey, will be about the neoclassical, Absalom and Achitophel. So, but then these are the first two papers. From there, from your, I think when you go on to the third semester, fourth semester, you will be carried on to the other periods. But I will roughly tell you how it will go about now. From neoclassical, you will be shifting over to the Romantic age. There will always be a transitional time, and there will be adorable, literary jerks who will be putting in their might, we cannot contain them to any single age. Like, we do have the Ben Jonson, and then we do have during the Gerald Manley Hopkins, from romantic age to the Victorian age, from the Victorian age to the Edwardians, and then the modern age, and then the First World War poetry, and then the Second World War poetry, and then which we call as the modern age, and then the postmoderns, which we start with 1950. Why I am bringing all these people in? Because when I saw the syllabus, the new syllabus, which was not very familiar, when I went to the syllabus, I found that your optionals, your electives from the third paper and fourth paper, they all belong to all these modern and postmodern period. So you should have an idea about, because every paper I saw that it has got a beautifully covered the background area. So you should be, before you embark upon any work or any text, you should actually be going through the background. Once the background is clear, I always found my history background of England, because for our main on our BA, at our BA level itself, we had British history. That British history, and then the history sounded, because whatever I really find that there should be more research work should be on literary historiography. Now historiography is there as revisiting the history, who wrote it, history is whose story, is it his story, or what about her story? So many things are there in historiography. But we should have literary historiography, because when we now either put Shakespeare on a pedestal, or bringing him down from the pedestal from the modern narratives, the thing is that we will have to understand the times in which they wrote. So as aesthetes, we will have to excuse them for certain stands they took. From the post-colonial studies, Shakespeare does not stand a chance. From the feminist point of view, Shakespeare does not stand a chance in any way to elevate him to any level. So all those things will always be there. And then particularly if all your children who are now going to the third semester, you should know the difference between, you should simultaneously able to grasp a work from literary criticism, traditional literary criticism, as well as the modern theory. Literary criticism is basically an empirical humanism, embracing everything, in the sense that embracing the system as it is. The classical people will be there, the elite will be there, the servants, just like in Shakespeare or in all the university about which, or till neoclassicism, in Shakespeare, or during those times, the servants will speak in prose, and then the elite and then the kings and the queens will speak in verse. So that is standardized, that is accepted, but we will not accept it now. We will not accept it from the theory point of view. When we talk about subaltern, everybody should have the chance to come up in life. So whenever we talk about theory is always about the subalterns. We are revisiting history, we are revisiting the things, and we are thinking it from, let it be all the subaltern things we have got, the feminist, the Marxist, the post-colonial, and then the LGBTQ, or whatever you have got, the queer theories, all those things, and then the marginalized and these things, and then the modern things like, the pandemic theories, the theory of angst, the theory of distress, whatever, and even the thing theory for that matter. Thing theory is slightly something different, but then thing theory can be also why certain things are elevated as things in the thing theory. All those things we can explore even at this point of time. You don't have to wait till you clear, when you come to the fourth semester, to learn about these theories. So whenever you given in the examination, whenever you have got to assess this thing, you can put both your, whenever you have to write a critical appreciation of anything, all of you should be able to evaluate a piece of work from the point of both literary criticism as well as literary theory. So my request to all of you, I think I have even jumped on Dr. Sadesh Pandey's timing. So all of you, when you are students, get this in mind, the tradition, and then you should be able to place all these authors in their respective places, of history, and give them the respect, because they are representing their times. Even though it's a cliche, literature is obviously the mirror of the times. So from that point of view, we can have a more lenient attitude towards these stalwarts who actually gave us a great time in reading and appreciating. And children, with these words, I want to, kickstart your next academic session, and I hope I will be part of it with these people allow me to, and then it will be a great pleasure teaching you all, and a big hand and a big post of appreciation to all this bunch of academicians who put up this program for all of you. Wish you all the best, and may God bless you, and may let us all come out of the pandemic times with more vigor, more enthusiasm, and more literary ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really a pleasure and an honor for us to have you here with us for this inaugural session. On behalf of the organizers, I once again appreciate the presence of men for this session. And hereafter, now I would like to introduce Madam Manjushri Sir Deshpande, who is the resource person for today's morning session. The session is on Absalom and Achitophel by John Dryden. Ma'am Sir Deshpande has 29 years of teaching experience. She is a poet, editor, translator, teacher trainer. Poem prescribed by her is the poem created by her has been prescribed for the state board textbook. She is a chairperson of English Language Committee of Textbook Bureau of Bal Bharati, BOS member of RTM Nagpur University, Commerce, and along with that of one college, Brihan Mumbai College of Pune, Kavi Kulguru Kalidas University. And at present, ma'am is heading the Department of English at R.S. Munle, Dharampet Arts and Commerce College, Nagpur. So I invite Manjushri Sir Deshpande ma'am to start with the class of Absalom and Achitophel, ma'am. And
I will mute myself.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Kapil.
Yeah.
Kapil, can I just have two sentences over here?
Yeah, ma'am. Sure.
No, Manjushri, please excuse me, because this is what I wanted to point. Because all you people who frame the syllabus actually can be in the first semester in the fourth part. Just because Dr. Manjushri is going to give.
Madam, you are mute.
Yeah.
In the first semester?
Yeah, Edmund Waller, the spelling is Edmund Walter, because that is very relevant now when she's going to take up. Edmund Waller, who is actually the heroic couplet, because he was basically responsible in influencing both Dryden as well as Pope. So in heroic couplet, when you're explaining, that spelling has to be corrected in the first semester. It is written as Edmund Walter. There is no Edmund Walter. It is Edmund Waller, W-A-L-L-E-R.
Okay.
He is also a fence-sitter, like, he was a royalist. He was the person who actually contributed to, who actually, in a way, made heroic couplet the most acceptable form. He was very popular during. So correct that in the syllabus. It is Valor. It is Captain Walter. That's just a thing. Sorry, just because other people will be watching it now.
Waller.
It is Waller. Edmund, W-A-L-L-E-R. Double L. Edmund Waller.
Thank you.
Should I start? Honorable Chief Guest of today's program, Dr. Sandhya Nair ma'am, my favorite, most beloved, seeing you after such a long time, ma'am, and it's really a great pleasure listening to you. And whenever you talk, it's like we get so many insights. It's always, I love listening to all your lectures. And whatever 5-10 minutes you spoke, I think we got so many ideas about so many different theories, how to go about doing things. So thank you very much, ma'am. And I was actually transported to our MA days when we used to have our collaborative teaching learning programs, and all the students and teachers from different colleges used to attend. So thank you for coming, and it was a great opportunity listening to you, ma'am. Dr. Dabir ma'am, Dr. Vandana Bhagdikar ma'am, Panikar sir, and Kapil Singhel sir, Madhvi Moril ma'am, and Dodevar sir. Actually, I would like, at the outset, I would like to thank all these members, all the organizing colleges, the conveners, for giving me this opportunity to be a part and parcel of this collaborative teaching learning program. This teaching learning activity is really a great help to the students of not only the students from the city, as well as people who are sitting far away in the rural areas also. It has become a great, it is beneficial to all the students, and it's a great help. And dear students, please make the most of it. All these things are available on the YouTube, so go, you can revise the lectures, go again and again, and you can make your own notes, and you have so many resources available. So you can, because here I have been given allotted like 1.5 hours, and doing the background and the Absalom and Achitophel. It's a mock heroic poem. So in 1.5 hours, I don't think I'll be able to do justice to the poem as well as the background. But dear students, as far as the background is concerned, you just need to write a short note. But let me see what I can tell you, so that you get an idea, and then you can go and read from the books and from the resources you have. So I move on to my lecture, and I would request Kapil sir to allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, you can, madam.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Yes, yes. Is it visible? Sir, is it visible?
Yeah. Make it full screen, full slideshow.
Yeah.
Yeah, now it's okay.
It's okay now.
Yeah.
So we begin with Absalom and Achitophel from 8th century English literature. And before we move on to Absalom and Achitophel, let us understand the background. And yes, we start with the English Civil War. And this Civil War is also called the Great Rebellion. It is also called the Wars of Three Kingdoms. It is called the Great Civil Wars, and it is also known as the English Revolution. Now let us talk about the English Civil Wars. These are some of the points I have chalked down for you, so that you can elaborate on these points. And the background is it carries 4 marks. So you just need to write a short note. And okay. So we begin with the English Civil War. First of all, students, what do you mean by Civil War? Civil means same country. So English Civil War. And the first, this English Civil War, it was a series of civil wars and political machinations between parliamentarians and royalists. So it was a series of civil wars. So maybe we are going to discuss the first war, second war, and the third war. I'll tell you why it is taken in singular also. And the English Civil War, it was a series of civil wars and political machinations, the political planning between the and the different schemes and plans. And basically, it was a war between the parliamentarians, who were called as Roundheads, and the royalists, who were supporting the monarchs. And this was mainly over the manner of England's governance and issues of religious freedom. It was a part of the wider wars of the three kingdoms. Now, the first war and the second war, I've given you the years. The first war was fought from 1642 to 1646, and the second war was fought from 1648 to 1649, and it was pitted. These wars pitted the supporters of King Charles I against the supporters of the Long Parliament. Now, why it is called a Long Parliament? Because it continued for nearly 20 years, from 1640 to 1660. From 1640 to 1660. And the Third War, it was from 1649 to 1651. And it saw the fighting between the supporters of King Charles and supporters of the Rump Parliament. Okay. So, and what is a Rump Parliament? Now, this was the name given to the Long Parliament after 140 members, they were expelled. So the remaining people who constituted the parliament, this was the name given, it was the Rump Parliament. So the wars also involved the Scottish Covenanters and Irish Confederates. Now, Covenanters, they are the Protestants. Now, the war ended with parliamentarian victory, and at the Battle of Worcester on 3rd September 1651. Now, unlike other civil wars in England, which were mainly fought over who should rule these conflicts, they were also concerned with how the three kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland should be governed. So the outcome of the threefold, the outcome was the trial and the execution of Charles I in 1649, the exile of his son Charles II in 1651, and the replacement of English monarchy with the Commonwealth of England, which from 1653, as the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland, it unified the British Isles under the personal rule of Oliver Cromwell. So please remember all these details. And briefly, yes, it continued briefly. His son, Richard Cromwell, after Oliver Cromwell, it was his son, Richard Cromwell, who came into power. He ruled from 1658 to 1659. Now, in England, the monopoly of the Church of England on Christian worship was ended. And in Ireland, the victors consolidated the established Protestant ascendancy. Now, constitutionally, the wars established the precedent that an English monarch cannot govern without the Parliament's consent. But the idea of parliamentary sovereignty, it was established only as a part of Glorious Revolution in 1688. We'll talk about the Glorious Revolution if we have time. Now, the term English Civil War appears mostly in singular, but the historians, they divided the conflict into 2 or 3 separate wars. They were not restricted to England, as Wales was a part of England and was affected accordingly. So the conflicts was the conflict also involved wars with Scotland and Ireland, and civil wars within them also. So the wars spanning all the 4 countries. Now we are calling it, we are saying 4 countries, right? Because now Wales is part, we've considered Wales as a part of England. So spanning all the 4 countries, so it's known as Wars of the 3 Kingdoms, England, Scotland, Ireland, in the early 19th century. Now, this is about the English Civil War. So I've given you a short note, and we can go into details if we have time. But you've got an idea what the English Civil War was, and because it is going to help you to understand Absalom and Achitophel also. Now, who are the court poets of the Restoration? So the court poets of England, yes, nowadays, like we also call them poet laureates. So this poet, the court poets of England, we'll see some. I have written some of them, and the court poets of England. So a court poet or a poet laureate is appointed for life by an English sovereign as a member of the royal household, and he is expected to compose poems for court and he's expected to compose poems for the court as well as for national occasions. On different national occasions also, they have to compose poems. Although Dryden's reputation is greater today, contemporaries, they saw the 1670s and the 1680s as the age of courtier poets in general, Edmund Waller was as praised as any, and just now ma'am has told us about his contribution to the heroic couplet, and he was also the royal poet. And Dryden, Rochester, Buckingham, and Dorset, they dominated verse, and they were all attached to the court of Charles. Aphra Behn, Matthew Prior, and Robert Gould, by contrast, they were outsiders who were profoundly royalist. Now, a willingness to satirize and the dependence upon wrote for the stage as well as the page also. Let us see some of the court poets. We've talked about Edmund Waller. Now we'll move on to John Wilmot. He was an English poet and courtier of King Charles II's Restoration Court. He was the second Earl of Rochester, and Andrew Marvell called him the best English satirist. And he was the most learned among the Restoration wits. He was known for a satire against reason and mankind. Just a few points I've written for everyone, because all of these poets you need to mention in your the court poets of the Restoration short note. Then we move on to Charles Sackville. He was the 6th Earl of Dorset. Yes, typical courtier of the reign of British King Charles II. And he was a poet whose satires in heroic couplets anticipated and influenced the styles of Alexander Pope. Then we have Sir Charles Sidley. He was the 5th Baronet and English noble, dramatist, and politician. He is principally remembered for his wit and profligacy. So, you know, most of them, they are known for their wits, and yes, widely known for his song, Phyllis is My Only Joy, chiefly produced light amatory verse, which involves, talks about sexual love, and pastoral dialogues in the 1670s. Now turn to satirical epigrams, short poems, in the 1680s and 1690s. Then we have Etheridge, Sir George Etheridge. He was an English dramatist, and I've written just 2 of his plays. Man of Mode, Sir Fopling Flutter. This is also one of his plays. He holds a distinguished place as one of the big 5 in Restoration comedy. He invented the comedy of manners and led the way to the achievements of Congreve and Sheridan. Then Etheridge's portraits of fops and beaux are considered to be the best of their kind. Fops and beaux, fashionable and beautiful people. Then John Dryden, we are going to talk about him. But as far as John Dryden was an English poet, literary critic, translator, and playwright, and he dominated the literary scene of his day. And he so dominated it that it came to be known as the Age of Dryden. So, and he was appointed England's first poet laureate in 1668. Now, the origins of the laureateship, it dates back to 1616, when a pension was provided to Ben Jonson. But you know, the first official holder of the position was John Dryden, who was appointed in 1668 by Charles II. You can see all these people having long hair. They used to wear wigs also. And yes, when we are talking about earls and baronets, I thought I should give you the peerages in the United Kingdom. So this is the order of the English noble titles. So we can have an idea. See, I have written some. Now, king, after the king, queen, we have prince, princess, duke, duchess, then marquis, marchioness, then earl, countess, viscount, viscountess, baron, baroness. We have some more, but here I've given a few to get an idea as far as their the hierarchy is concerned. Now the third is restoration of monarchy. Now, in 1660, the parliament offered to restore the monarchy if Charles would agree to concessions for religious toleration and a general amnesty. Now, you know that Charles II was he went into exile. So now in 1660, the parliament offered to restore, to call him back if he would agree to concessions for religious toleration. Charles was not as hard-headed as his father, and he agreed to the proposals. He returned to London on a wave of popular support to be crowned, and his reign was from 1660 to 1685. So it was the restoration of monarchy in England in 1660. It marked the return of Charles II as king, and he followed the period of Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth. Now, what happened with this restoration? The bishops were restored to the parliament, which established a strict Anglican orthodoxy. Then the period, which also included the reign of James II, it was marked by an expansion in colonial trade, the Anglo-Dutch Wars, and the revival of drama and literature. Then the restoration was notable for a relaxation of the strict Puritan morality of the previous decades. Theatre, sports, and dancing were revived. Charles's court was notable for its revelry and licentiousness. So this is about the restoration of monarchy. Now let us see what is Royal Society. Now the Royal Society, formerly the Royal Society of London, for improving natural knowledge. Now this Royal Society is a learned society and the United Kingdom's National Academy of Sciences. It was founded on 28 November 1660. It was granted a royal charter by King Charles II as the Royal Society. And it is the oldest national scientific institution in the world. The society fulfills a number of roles: promoting science and its benefits, recognizing excellence in science, supporting outstanding science, providing scientific advice for policy, fostering international and global cooperation, education, and public engagement. Then we move on to the development of satire. This is very important. Now, what is satire in the first place? Satire, it's a literary technique in which behaviors or institutions are ridiculed for the purpose of improving society. Now, what sets satire apart from other forms of social and political protest is humor. Now, satirists use irony and exaggeration to poke fun at human faults and foolishness in order to correct human behavior. Now, satire, when did it begin? Satire began with the ancient Greeks, but came into its own, that it flourished in ancient Rome, where the fathers of satire, Horace and Juvenal, had their names given to the two basic types of satire. Now, Horatian satire is playfully amusing. Let us see what kind of satire is Horatian satire. We have these three kinds of satires. So Horatian satire is playfully amusing, and it tries to make change gently and with understanding. Now, Alexander Pope uses Horatian satire in his famous epic poem, The Rape of the Lock. Now, according to Alexander Pope, satire heals with morals what it hurts with wits. Beautiful. Now, satire can hurt as well as heal. Now, satire at its best addresses itself to problems that have general implications and it supports conclusions. Now, Jonathan Swift uses Juvenalian satire in his famous book, Gulliver's Travels. And Juvenalian satire provokes a darker kind of laughter. It is often bitter and it criticizes corruption or incompetence with scorn and outrage. So this is the difference. The first one was gentle and with understanding, and this one is with scorn and outrage. While Horatian satire attempts to teach, Juvenalian satire, it punishes. Now, the duty of the satirist is to reproach the bad or praise the good, to correct or reconcile the inequilibrium between flaws and virtues. Now, Juvenalian satire is critical. juvenile gloats over the punishment of wrongdoers. Now, there's one more kind of a satire, the Menippean satire. It is a form of satire, usually in prose, that is characterized by attacking mental attitudes. Now, see here, this is the difference, that it is characterized by attacking mental attitudes rather than specific individuals or entities. Now, satire was very popular in 18th century Europe, and in England, this golden age of satire included Swift. The 18th century was dominated by satiric poetry, prose, and drama. Satirists, as guardians of culture, they sought to protect their highly developed civilization from corruption by attacking hypocrisy, arrogance, greed, vanity, and stupidity. Satire faded in popularity during the 19th century, with the exception of Mark Twain, among others. Now, in the 20th century, what happened? In the 20th century, satire tended to be juvenalian. George Orwell's Animal Farm, it departed from the gloomy pattern through the use of fantasy. Now, satire appears to be enjoying a renaissance in the 21st century. It is revival, of the satire with the popularity of political satire. Now, let us move on with this short note on development of satire. Now, before we move on, this is John Dryden. Yes, the writer of, he's the poet who has written Absalom and Achitophel. And Absalom and Achitophel, it is a widely celebrated satirical poem. It was first published anonymously in November of 1681. It is written in the heroic couplet form, and it is a mock epic poem. What is a mock epic poem? So it is a satirical form that produces ridicule and humor, and by the presentation of low characters or trivial subjects in the lofty style of classical epic or heroic poems. And it is invariably a poem in heroic couplet. And what is a heroic couplet? It is a rhyming couplet. It is a pair of lines with end rhymes in iambic pentameter, meaning there are 5 iambic feet on each line. The heroic couplet traditionally appears in long narrative poems called epics, but it can also be used in mock epics that parody the heroic tone of epic poetry. Then this is one of finest English political satires. We'll talk about political satires. Then, and it is an allegory also, where the surface meaning is different, but it has a underlying meaning. So an allegory regarding contemporary political events. So the poem also references the Popish plot. We'll be talking about the Popish plot and the Monmouth rebellion. Now we move on to the biblical background. I'm moving a little faster because we need to do the whole poem. We are not going to go line by line, but I'll be talking about the poem. I'll be giving you a gist of the poem. Now, before we begin, let me give you the biblical background. So, the story of Absalom's rebellion against his father, King David, is told in the Old Testament of Bible in the second book of Samuel in chapters 14 to 18. Now, the beautiful Absalom is distinguished by his extraordinarily abundant hair, which is thought to symbolize his pride. And when David's renowned advisor, Achitophel, joins Absalom's rebellion, another advisor, Hushai, he plots with David to pretend to defect and give Absalom advice that plays into David's hands. Now, result is that Absalom takes the advice of the double agent Hushai over the good advice of Achitophel. And Achitophel, realizing that the rebellion is doomed to failure, he goes home and hangs himself. So Absalom is killed after getting caught by his hair in the thick branches of a great oak tree. Now, this is as far as the story in the Bible goes. So the second allegory, which is given, which is taken by Dryden in the poem, and it beginning on line 425, is the parable of prodigal son, which can be found in the New Testament in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 15, verse 11 to 32. It is a tale of a son who asks for his birthright early. He loses it and returns to his father, who then takes pity on him and shares with him his remaining fortune. So this is what usually the fathers do. The father's forgiveness contrasts with the response of David towards Achitophel. But still the story works well for a theme that deals with problems of ascension, and Dryden uses similarities and differences in the two stories to express the poem's themes, ideas from this second allegory, which occurs throughout the poem. Now we'll have a look at the historical background. Now in 1681, in England, Charles II, in 1681, he was 15 years of age. He had a number of mistresses, and he produced a number of illegitimate children. Now, one of these was James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, who was very popular, and both for his personal charisma and for his fervor for the Protestant cause. Now, Charles had no legitimate heirs, and his brother, the future King James II, was openly a Roman Catholic. So when Charles' health suffered, there was a panic in the House of Commons over the potential for the nation being ruled by the Roman Catholic king. The Earl of Shaftesbury had sponsored and advocated the Exclusion Bill. Now, what is this Exclusion Bill? This would prevent James from succeeding to the throne, but this bill was blocked by the House of Lords on 2 occasions. And in the spring of 1681, at the Oxford Parliament, Shaftesbury appealed to Charles to legitimize Monmouth, and Monmouth was caught preparing to rebel and seek the throne, and Shaftesbury was suspected of fostering this rebellion. So the poem was written possibly at Charles's behest, and it was published in November 1681. On November 1681, Shaftesbury was seized and he was charged with high treason. A trial before a jury picked by Whig sheriffs acquitted him. So this is the historical background. And then we'll talk about political analysis. So now then later, after the death of his father, the Duke of Monmouth, unwilling to see his uncle James become king, he executed his plans and went into full revolt. Now what happened? The Monmouth rebellion was put down, and in 1685, the Duke was executed. Now, these are the two stories, but I told you it is how two stories have been taken by Dryden. We'll see when we are doing the poem. So it is a political allegory and a satire. So on the surface, John Dryden's poem, Absalom and Achitophel, is a rehashing of the story of David, the third king of Israel, and his illegitimate son, Absalom, who rebels against his father and tries to usurp his throne. However, this biblical story is merely an allegory. It's a form of extended metaphor for the political events that unfolded in Dryden's times. Now, before we move, we should know what the Popish plot and the exclusion crisis is. In 1678, an alleged Catholic conspiracy to assassinate King Charles II, this was known as the Popish plot. It swept across England, creating mass anti-Catholic hysteria and prompting the exclusion crisis of 1679. The exclusion crisis lasted till 1681, and it consisted of 3 parliamentary bills which attempted to exclude James. Now, listen carefully. So, exclusion crisis, they wanted to exclude James, King Charles's brother, from royal succession because he was a Roman Catholic rather than a Protestant. So, Dryden's poem is a thinly veiled satirical roast of the political drama that pervaded English society in the late 1670s and 1680s. and no one is spared. And Dryden, with his wit, he doesn't spare anyone. According to Dryden, the true end of satire is the amendment of vices by correction, and Absalom and Achitophel is an attempt to that end. So through the use of satire and allegory in Absalom and Achitophel, Dryden ultimately argues that the Popish plot and the exclusion crisis were devious ploys to divert the rightful order of succession and prevent James II from ascending the throne. Now see, this is Charles II. This is Duke of Monmouth, Absalom. Yes. Anthony Ashley. Yes, he's the Achitophel. He's Achitophel, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. Now we do the poem. This poem has 302 lines. Yes, it's written in heroic couplet, as I told you earlier. Now King David of Israel, who is compared to Charles II of England, he had no legitimate issue from his legally married wife, though he had a number of illegitimate children from his several mistresses. Of these illegitimate issues, Absalom, who is compared to the Duke of Monmouth, was the bravest, handsomest, and most polished of men and manners. Now he charmed everybody and won their esteem and regard. He had distinguished himself in a number of battles abroad. He was the favorite child of his father, the king, and he was very popular with the people also. Now the Jews means the English people, they were moody and self-willed. They were not satisfied even under the mild and gentle rule of King David. They clamored for greater liberty. They cherished the belief that since they had restored the king to the throne, they had also the right to dethrone him. But the sober-minded section of the people was peace-loving, and it had not forgotten the horrors that the civil war brought in its train. So it wanted peace. Further, now David ruled so well that even the malcontents among the people could not get a chance to raise the banner of revolt. Only the devil alone provided them with an to rebel. Were oppressively by the chosen people, Protestants, in a variety of ways. Now they were deprived of their lands and were made to pay enhanced taxes. They could not be appointed to any high post under the government, and they were made to suffer many disabilities. They continued to suffer silently, but the situation became highly insufferable for them when their gods and holy relics were burnt. Such a turn in the situation, they made a bid to convert the Protestants to their faith. Now, this alarmed the Jewish rebels, the clergy of the Church of England, and also they inflamed their mind. So, hence originated the Popish plot. This plot was verified with solemn oath by Titus Oates and others, and was similarly denied and disowned by Catholics. It was even alleged that the Jebusites had designed to assassinate the king. So this was a cause of concern, and ultimately, actually, the plot failed to win its objective and its repercussions. But what happened? The repercussions were wide-ranging. A number of people who were dissatisfied with the king for this or that reason, they emerged into activity, and they set about organizing a revolt against the government. The chief among the disgruntled band was Achitophel, Shaftesbury. Just now we saw his picture, who was surprisingly cunning and treacherous. Now, in the matter of principles and morality, he was completely barren and bankrupt. He was perpetually discontented and he was restless. He made a bold and capable leader in times of danger, but was no good in times of peace. So you could see that such people only, they are very ambitious, very powerful, And as a judge, he was upright and above board, but as a politician, he was abominable. He was determined either to rule the state or ruin it. So some people are like this. So he was also determined either to rule the state or ruin it. So in order to realize his unholy aim, what did he do? He posed himself as the defender and promoter of the people's cause and the champion of their rights and liberty. He exploited the popish plot to inflame the popular mind. He set the rumor on foot that the king himself was a Catholic at heart. So he said at heart, the king himself is a Catholic who has signed a secret treaty with the Catholic. Actually, in this way, he raised the anger of the heedless Jews. Now, Achitophel, he required a person. Now, his motives, we've seen his motives. So now he requires a person who would be, who could act as a leader of the people and yet remain a puppet dancing to the pull of his wire. So who will become his puppet? To him, Absalom appeared to be the most suitable person for this purpose. Achitophel knew that as Absalom was the illegitimate son of the king and had thus no legal title to the throne, he would depend entirely on his support and backing. So what did he do? He tried to win him to his side by means of a number of cunning and plausible arguments. He began by flattening him and asserting that he was cut out to become a king. And as the people also wanted him, he must come forward to champion their cause. We know that Absalom was liked by the people also. He tickled his vanity by calling him the savior of the nation and assured him that he was immensely popular. He then pointed to him that there was a current in the affairs of man, which, taken on the tide, they led on to fortune. Now, such a golden chance had now come for him, and he must hurry to seize it. This is what he's telling him. He's trying to brainwash him. He must follow the example of his father, who returned from exile swiftly at the call of the people and became the king. And again, he should not be afraid of the king because he had forfeited the love and regard of his people and was old. So what does he tell him? That your father is old. He is weak, infirm, and friendless now. He was surrounded by enemies on all sides. So he is trying to convince him. If he went in for foreign help, people will detest him all the more. Achitophel further confined to him by his cunning methods. He had turned the people dead against David. Now, people wanted their rights and liberty, and they needed a suitable and capable leader to guide them in their movement. And none was as suitable as Absalom because he had royal blood in his veins. He was the illegitimate son of David, so he had the royal blood in his veins. So Achitophel also thought that this person could be his puppet. Now, Absalom listened to Achitophel's address attentively, and he felt flattered. Naturally, when somebody is praising you in this manner, you will feel flattered. But he hesitated to act upon it at once because, he liked his father, so he didn't want to go against his father. In the first flash of thought, it appeared to him that the course he was called upon to follow, it was inappropriate and it was inadvisable. So let's read something from the text. It's very beautiful. Reason to rebel against his father. So he says, there is no excuse for me to rebel against my father, whose rule is kind. He is so merciful that he pardons even his enemies and is ever eager to do good to his people. Even if he were a callous and cruel ruler oppressing his subjects, it would not have been possible for me to rebel against him because he's after all my father. And David also loved him dearly. My sense of duty would deter me. So he says that as a son, he knew his duty. And besides, he says that, yes, my father loves me, gives me everything except the right to inherit the crown. Why? Because because of the illegitimate issue. Now, I'm not entitled to it. So what does Absalom say? I'm not entitled to it. His brother has every right in law. Whose brother? Charles's brother. His brother, James, has every right in law to the throne, and he is just, he is noble, and he is capable too. I regret that fate has made me illegitimate. So what can I do? I'm not destined only. So I feel that I am fit for being, he says, I feel that I am fit for being a king, and the desire to be great troubles my heart. So in the heart of his heart, he wants to be a king. Yes, but he knows that he is illegitimate. The issue of illegitimacy is going to interfere here. So the concluding observation of Absalom, the last portion, it gave hope to Achitophel when he says, I feel that I am fit for being a king, and the desire to be great troubles my heart. These are the lines, and he realized shrewdly that Absalom loved to be great, but he was hesitant. So he decided to make him firm in his resolve. And with that end in view, he began further and spoke to Absalom, and he said, now I'll read something which Achitophel says. He says, you should not let your extraordinary talent rot in idleness. God has made you to rule, and so you must give the people the bliss and blessings of your reign. David is undoubtedly gentle and generous. He's agreeing to it. He's saying, yes, David is undoubtedly gentle and generous, but mainly his manly vein and vigor suits a king better. The people take his gentleness as a sign of weakness, and so they hate him. And thinking him a weak ruler, they are trying to free themselves from his bondage. Now the Sanhedrin, that is the parliament, kept him poor. And every time he approached it for funds, he was obliged by it to give up some of his rights. So this also we know that whenever, because he was lacking funds, and whenever he was asked for funds, he had to give up some of his rights. So now this is what Achitophel is trying to tell Absalom, that how weak he has become, and he surrenders. So he says, I myself would continue to embarrass him with new plots of entangle him in the mesh of costly wars. So see, I will also entangle him in costly wars. His faithful friends are all suspects, and he is hated by the people. So this is what he tells him. And why? Because he's a Catholic. Now, moreover, the kings are the trustees of the people. What does he tell him? That yes, after all, the kings are the trustees of the people, who have every right to withdraw the executive authority which the king holds and wields as their trustee. So it depends on the people. It is in the hands of the people. The laws of succession are made for the good of the people. As for his love, so whatever points he had said, talked about his father. So now he is ruling away each and every point. So as for his love, what does he say? Let him show it in actual practice. If he loves you, why does he not declare you his successor? His brother hates you and is waiting for a suitable opportunity to annihilate you. You should therefore take time by the forelock and strike when the iron is hot. You should rise again against your father, but pose and declare to the people that the king's life was in danger, and you are only trying to free him from the clutches of his enemies, and that is the Catholics. And you can say that perhaps David himself wants to make you the king, but he's afraid of his brother and wants to be taken by force. So this is, see how he's trying to convince Absalom. Now the most important among Absalom's, now we move on to the other characters. The most important among Achitophel's followers was Zimri. Now, who's Zimri? He's the Duke of Buckingham. He was an inconstant man of rigidly held extremist views, inconsistent. Okay, he was inconsistent. So he squandered away his wealth and was banished from court on account of his own fault and foolishness. He then tried to form parties against the king, but he could not become the leader of any of them. And he was inherently wicked, but he lacked the means to put his wickedness into practice. Now, Dryden has given us, he's talked about a few people. Next in importance in the group was Shimei. He's the sling spy Bethel. He's the sheriff of London. He was so badly corrupt and debased that he did not shrink from even cursing the king. So these are the people who are with him in the court. See what type of people he's surrounded with. He was so badly corrupt and debased that he did not shrink from even cursing the king. He was a miser of the worst type. So much so that he gave not a single entertainment during the tenure of his office. He starved his servants, he drank no wine, he kept no kitchen. He was so miserly. He made his pile by cheating others in different ways. Now, during his term as magistrate, the wicked had a field day and the enemies of the king received every protection. In short, he was a very mean person. Now we move on to the next person who's a very important one. And he is the worst of them all. And his name is Korah, Titus Oates. He was the son of a weaver, but the fact of his hatching the popish plot, it raised him in people's esteem. So he was the one who was responsible for the popish plot. He posed as the promoter of society and the king and verified the plot on oath. His sunken eyes and harsh, loud voice was indicative of his ill temper. So this is the description of Titus Oates. He had a loud voice which showed his ill temper and proud nature. And whoever expressed doubt about his witness was dubbed a Catholic and implicated in his plot. So he brought about the assassination of Agag for his being on friendly terms with the Jebusites. So this is what he did. Now let us see what happens after this. We've seen what type of people David is surrounded with. There is a popish plot which was hatched and the people, they tried to kill the king. But misled by Achitophel, Absalom left the court. As a preliminary step, now what is he going to do? What is the step after listening to the advice of Achitophel? What is he going to do? As a preliminary step, he undertook a tour of the country with stately pomp and glamour. He spoke to the people with becoming humility, and he expressed sorrow at their hard lot, at their inability to help them. So, he talked to people, he talked about his inability to help them because, he could not rise against his father, who was the cause of their misery. So he also thought that the people are in a problem and they are in problem because of his father's inability to help them. He could offer only his tears. He says, I can offer you only my tears. His only weapon. So his tears were only his weapon. His humbleness, his winning manners and charming his charming look. It impressed everybody. And wherever he went, he was hailed as the savior. Now, this tour was maneuvered by the cunning Achitophel. Its purpose was to form an estimate of the people's extent of love and support. So, even Absalom would get an estimate that people have of their backing. So before coming out openly in revolt against the king, so he was planning this revolt against the king, and before he could come up with his plan, he wanted to estimate what is the nature of the people. So the real purpose of Absalom and Achitophel was clearly concealed behind a show of love and duty for the king. It was war in the guise of peace. Now, the mind of the people of Israel was corrupted by means of a number of plausible arguments. They were made to believe that in the final analysis, power rests with the people. So, yes, they were told that yes, power rests with you, and that they were not bound by the bonds entered into by their ancestors. The kings were their trustees, and they held the executive authority in trust for them. So the kings are the trustees. This was ingrained in their minds. They, the kings, they are in duty, bound to exercise that authority for their good. Now, if that authority is used arbitrarily and wrongly, the people were at liberty to withdraw it. Now, the foolish Israelites were deluded by such reasoning. They did not pause to ponder and realize the fact that sons are certainly born by the actions of their forefathers. They are bound. Yes, they are bound by the actions of their forefathers. For all mankind has to suffer for the sin of Adam. It followed, therefore, that the contract under which the people transferred power to one individual is as binding on them as their forebears. So the contract is irrevocable. Moreover, who is to examine and decide whether the actions of the king are right or wrong? The crowds, they are fickle-minded and hot-headed, and hence their thinking and arguing cannot be sound and safe to act upon. Now, no orderly and civilized life would be possible if the right to rebel and dethrone the king is conceded to the people. Now, even if the king is unjust, it is not advisable and desirable to topple an established government. For there may ensue a civil war, and then bringing in its train worse suffering for the people than before. So you know that they have already undergone such type of suffering. But the misguided Israelites, they could not think on these lines, thanks to Ahithophel and his cunning. Now the revolutionary mania was so widely rampant among the people that many of David's friends deserted his company. See now what has happened to David. His friends also deserted him. Even the few who stood by him, even they were regarded as enemies of the people. So among such of his friends, the name of Barzillai, who is the Duke of Ormond, his name was prominently taken. He was honorable and advanced in age and had always served the king faithfully. He had also accompanied the king in his exile and shared in his sufferings and sorrows abroad. He was generous of heart and a patron of poets and warriors. He had fathered 8 children, out of whom 6 were already dead. The poet is all praise for his eldest son, who passed away in the prime of his life. So this is what we come to know about the Duke of Ormond, who was a friend of David and who was with him even in the exile. And then another friend, next among the king's friend was Zadok. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now he was modest and of retiring disposition. There was Segan of Jerusalem, he was the Bishop of London. He was the scion of a noble family and he was endowed with a hospitable nature. After him was John Dolben, the Dean of Westminster on the list. So these are a few people who were David's friends. He was noted for, now this person, John Dolben, he was noted for his fiery oratory. Also included in the friends group were some distinguished expounders of the law. There was a group of loyal peers of whom the eminent personalities were those of Adriel, the Earl of Mulgrave, then Jonathan, Marquis of Halifax, and Hushel, Earl of Rochester. The last of all came the name of Emil, Emil Edward Seymour, the Speaker of the House of Commons. Now these friends of David, they remained loyal to him till the end. Now they watched with anguish, they were very sad They watched with anguish the mounting ramp of revolution. They realized the dangers inherent in the situation, and they warned the king also. They suggested to him that drastic action was called for, as mild measures would only worsen the situation. Then what happened? At long last, David, who had suffered with patience and forbearance, he addressed the people with divinely animated voice and listened to, and he was listened to in people loved him. They listened to him in pin drop silence. He told them that as king, he was also the father of his people. So far, he had been kind and indulgent towards them, as a father should be. But how he would fulfill his, but now he would fulfill his duty as a king. The people had mistakenly taken his mercy as a sign of fear on his part. They wanted law and justice, so he would now give them what they wanted. He had been a patient man, and they should beware of the fury of a patient man when roused. So he says, right, up till now I was patient, but you should be aware of the person who is patient. What happens when he is roused? He would give them justice and nothing but justice as they clamor for. He knew his own rights. He knew that people or the parliament alone could not choose a successor to the throne, as his consent was also necessary. So this is what he told them. This, yes, you will not be able to choose a successor until, because his consent was also necessary. He would not part with his friends simply on the clamor of the mob. They must first prove something against him. And he would teach his people to obey him. His victory was certain. The zest and zeal of the people is soon exhausted. So the people were like, whatever excitement, whatever they had in them after the king spoke, it was all exhausted, and their energy dissipated in no time. Then they can be, so he says that the zest and zeal of the people is soon exhausted, and the energy also dissipates in no time. Then they can be easily subdued. He would wait for his opportunity and then strike with overwhelming force so that they may be easily conquered. Now, God listened to David's speech and agreed with it. Law and order was once more established in the country, and he ruled in peace for years on end. He had no legitimate issue from his legally married wife, though he had a number of illegitimate children from his several mistresses. So therefore, he ruled for many years after that. And of these illegitimate issues, Absalom, who is compared to the Duke of Monmouth, he was the bravest, handsomest, and most polished of men and manners. And he charmed everybody and won their esteem and regard. He had distinguished himself in a number of battles abroad, and he was the favorite child of the father king, and popular. He was also popular with the people. So now, after the king's address, here we come to the end of the poem. And as far as the themes of the poem is concerned, we have already talked about Absalom and Ahithophel as a political satire. And here in the end, the king rules for a long time. This is in the story, he rules for a long time. We know what happened as far as the biblical story is concerned, and as far as the history also goes. But in the poem, it is said that he ruled for quite some time after that. And the poem ends there. But in the history, we come to know about the Monmouth rebellion also, and how the Duke of Monmouth was ultimately, he was executed. So that is the end in as far as the history is concerned. Now we have some time, and we'll discuss about the themes. So as we've talked about the talked about Absalom and Achitophel as a political satire, as an allegory. We've talked about the biblical background, and we've talked about the historical background also. And here there is uh, the theme also revolves around God, religion, and the divine rights of kings. Now, at the center of John Dryden's poems, God, this theme is very prominent, God and religion. Uh, it is a satirical critique of the contemporary politics, but Dryden, he couches his argument in a biblical story, which I told you in the beginning. Absalom and Achitophel focuses on David, who is the third king of Israel, and his illegitimate son, Absalom. And we know that under his direction and under the direction of Achitophel, he attempts to ascend the throne despite his common birth. Nearly all the characters in Dryden's poems are biblical in origin. I've given you the biblical equivalents also. So they are biblical in origin. However, each of them represents a contemporary figure. We've talked about the names also. Religion is also reflected through multiple references to both Catholicism and Protestantism. And Dryden indeed comments on the anti-Catholic hysteria that consumed England, an overwhelmingly Protestant country, during the 1600s. Much of Dryden's audience, both Catholics and Protestants alike, were highly religious, and they were familiar with the biblical story represented in Absalom and Achitophel. But this isn't the only reason. Dryden chose to situate his argument within a religious framework. Through his rehashing of the biblical story of King David and Absalom, Dryden effectively argues that King Charles II and his successor, his brother and collateral heir to the throne, James, both have a divine right to occupy the throne bestowed upon them by God, and that right is not to be infringed upon by the people or parliament. So here we talk about God, religion, and the divine rights of the king. So, in keeping with the biblical story, Dryden's David, he's anointed, he's a sacred ritual. Anointed means it's a sacred ritual that indicates divine influence and presence by pouring consecrated oil over the head as the king of Israel after the death of Saul. Who's Saul? The first king of Israel. Now, in this poem, Dryden uses David to represent King Charles II of England, suggesting that Charles also has divine influence and presence and is thus worthy of kingship. Dryden introduces David. He claims and he says he's Israel's monarch and he's godlike. And after the phrase which he uses for David is after heaven's own heart. So that is, he's godlike, he's Israel's monarch. Not only does Dryden compare David to God, he claims that they are very much the same. David is God's own heart, which is to say that David and God are the kindred spirit and they are of the same mind. David infers that the same applies to Charles, and like David, he too is godlike and after God's own heart. So that is, after the death of Saul, his son, Ishbosheth ruled Israel while David was in exile. Had fortune not called David back, Dryden writes, at Gath and exile, he might still remain. So, the monarchy was abolished after 10 years before Charles II finally took the throne in 1660. And Dryden thus implies that Charles remained in Brussels in exile. So that means God's divine influence and presence would have been wasted if David would have been in exile. So Dryden's representation of Charles II as King David implies that Charles has a divine right to be the king, just as David does. So as the king, Charles is influenced by God himself. This divine role cannot be limited or removed by earthly means. So this is what goes behind this story. Now, as Ahithophel encourages Absalom to usurp his father, Absalom is initially hesitant to agree. Absalom says he has no pretense to royalty. And Dryden argues that James Scott, the first Duke of Monmouth, Charles's own illegitimate son, who tried to usurp the throne, has no claim to the crown either. Absalom asks Ahithophel what right he has to take up arms for public liberty when his father governs with unquestioned rights. So this is what we've already seen. And as he's of common birth, so he doesn't have any right because he's of common birth. Absalom doesn't think he has the right to lead the people because David was given the right by God. So Dryden implies that Charles too has been given the same right, not by the Duke of Monmouth. Absalom, he tells Ahithophel that David has told him he would make him king if he could, but the crown, the king said with a sigh, is just destined for a worthier head. So this is how Charles tells, or David tells Absalom that I'm helpless. Absalom can't be the king because God has already chosen someone else. Dryden argues the same for the Duke of Monmouth. Monmouth cannot be the king because the divine right belongs to another. Now, when the time comes for David to rest from his toils, Absalom says the lawful issue of the throne will ascend down a collateral line that ends with David's brother, who, though he is oppressed with vulgar spite, people feel that he is not a good person. He is dauntless and secure of native right. So he is the rightful person in line. In other words, the lawful issue of the English throne, in the absence of Charles, ascends down an adjacent line to James, who, despite his Catholicism or vulgar spite, he has still been chosen by God and is determined to claim his native right. So we talk about God, religion, and the divine right of the king. In the end also, David publicly addresses Israel about Absalom's ambition for the crown. And he says that had God ordained his fate for empire born, David says he would have been given his soul, he would have given his soul another turn. But he says, if God wanted Absalom to be the king, he would have made him king. Ultimately, the rebellion of Absalom is quelled and peace returns to Israel. So once more, the godlike David was restored. And Dryden concludes, he says, all the willing nations knew that their lawful lord. Dryden suggests that the same argument applies to the Duke of Monmouth and James. Charles is the lawful lord until he dies. And then after his death, James is the rightful king by the order of God. So like Absalom, if God had intended Monmouth to be the king, he would have made him one. So this is the argument which Dryden puts forward. Now, one more theme we'll talk about, and that is regarding power and ambition. So power and ambition drives, this is the most, because the whole poem is revolving with this theme of power and ambition. So power and ambition drive the plot of Dryden's this poem, Absalom and Ahithophel. And King David of Israel has all the power in theory, but actually in practice, he has little ambition. Now, according to Ahithophel, the king's deceitful counselor, David is lacking manly force and he gives in too easily to the people. The king is mild, he is hesitant to draw blood. And Ahithophel, in his ambition for increasing power, he says that David is weak. But when should people strive their bonds to break? Ahithophel says to David's son, Absalom, if not when kings are negligent or weak. The Jews of Israel well know their power. Ahithophel maintains, and it is the perfect time to assert that power and overthrow David's rule. So he says, now Absalom is also ambitious, and he agrees. Absalom, just because he's ambitious, he gains power through war. And after Ahithophel's influence, Absalom has ambition to ascend his father's throne. So with the portrayal of power and ambition in Absalom and Ahithophel, with this, Dryden argues that some ambition of power is good and even admirable. Attempting to take power that rightfully belongs to the king is a deadly sin. So he says that, see, he says that yes, power and ambition is good, but when it rightfully belongs to the king, then attempting to take that power is a sin. David's mild nature and his willingness to give people what they want produces men who are greedy for more and more power, like Ahithophel. So Ahithophel is just after power. Dryden describes Ahithophel. He is actually very wise and bold. He knows that he is restless and unfixed in his current office and ethics. People who are industrious, they continuously are up to something. Ahithophel is of that and impatient of disgrace. So when you are unpleased, so you tend to do so many things. Dryden implies that Ahithophel is accomplished and has some power in government, but he wants more. And since he thinks David is a disgrace, he tries to obtain more power through unscrupulous means. Of Ahithophel, Dryden says that in friendship, false, implacable in hate. He's like that. He's resolved to ruin or to rule the state. We've seen this. Now, Ahithophel's ambition for power is so strong, he only pretends to respect the king, when in truth he despises David and he plans to strip his power by any means necessary. So according to Dryden, Ahithophel is tired of law, fame, and lazy happiness. He hates his golden fruit to gather free, so he gives the crowd his arm to shake the tree. That means, in other words, Ahithophel is no longer interested in the power or golden fruit that is freely available, and so he attempts to shake some power loose from higher up the tree. What does he do? And he holds up the buckler of the people's cause against the crown. That is, he poisons the minds of the people and Absalom. Okay. So although Absalom's ambitions of power are reasonable at first, he too grows greedy. And eventually he sets his sight on overstepping the king through dishonest means. So we see power and ambition in Absalom also. So when Dryden first introduces Absalom, he says, he talks about Absalom, I quote the lines, early in foreign fields, he won renown with kings and states allied to Israel's crown. So initially, Absalom's ambition is appropriate and loyal, and he makes a name for himself fighting in wars. However, despite this power, Absalom begins to desire more. Absalom knows that the power he desires, that of his father's throne, is not his to have. He knows this. However, this does not stop him from pursuing it. As Absalom tries to win the favor of Jews, he employs a brilliant scheme in which he claims he has no power, telling the people that his father has given away all of his power. And as he speaks, Absalom wipes a tear from his eye. So, by claiming to be lowly and powerless, Absalom is effectively able to gather more power from the people through their support and love. And they quickly become his devoted followers and they are ready to forsake David. Now, King David's waning power, however, is true in appearance only. See, we felt that the king is weak, but in appearance only he is weak, and he soon grows tired of Ahithophel's plotting and Absalom's rebellion. From David's royal throne, by heaven inspired, he spoke to the people of Israel, and he spoke with awful fear. He says, "'Tis time to show that I am not good with force. Those heaped affronts that haughty subjects bring are burdens for a camel, not a king." David's power, David claims, he claims that his power is endowed by God, and thus he cannot be brought down with Absalom and Ahithophel's earthly attempts at power. David claims his power is not to be trifled with. And he says, up till now, David's power has been silent and controlled, but he can easily draw his sword and order war. So for David, there is power in restraint, but he reminds his subjects that he can just as easily release violence and conflict. David knows that his enemies will one day fight, and he is prepared. He says that when they are breathless and tired, David will rise upon them with redoubled might, for lawful power is still superior found. David's enemies will expend their power and tire, but David's power cannot be diminished. It will not reduce. As David speaks to the Israelites, thunder rips through the sky. God himself confirms that David's power is absolute, and Dryden therefore argues cannot be usurped or threatened by even the most ambitious play to power. As Absalom and Achitophel is an allegory for Dryden's own political climate, Dryden thus implies that King Charles II of England's power, while often easygoing and merciful, is absolute as well. So like David, Charles's power is bestowed upon him by God, and it is therefore sinful for Charles's illegitimate son, the first Duke of Monmouth, or anyone else to tread on that power. So with this, I think we'll stop here. There are many things, but in this given time, we can do this much. And I hope I have reached you. You've understood Absalom and Achitophel. If you have now, as the students are on YouTube, we cannot have questions. So back to Kapil sir.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. So starting with the background topics, giving us the gist of the poem and covering almost all the aspects. In fact, the poem covers the whole restoration era, the whole restoration period is covered in the poem. It is said that it covers something more than what any history book should be having in it for that age. So it is really a challenging task to finish it off in an hour. But I think ma'am has covered all the aspects, that is the biblical one, historical one, satirical, political, and so along with the topics for background. On behalf of the participating students and the collaborating colleges, 4 colleges, I thank Madam Manjushri Sardeshpande for this lecture, and pass on the mic to Dr. Karthik Panikar for giving us the details of the next session. So thank you, ma'am. Sardeshpande, madam, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Dear students, today evening we'll be having the session by Dr. Pranjali Kane at 4:30. So do make it convenient to join us for the evening session at 4:30.
That is the 4th unit, huh?
Yeah, 4th unit. Thomas, Gray's elegy, Thomas Gray's elegy, and Blake's poems.
Blake's poem. Okay.
Yeah, we have posted it on the group. I hope all the teachers will circulate it to the students.